Happy Monday, everybody. Appreciate everybody that's tuned in. My name's Jason Priester, Clemson Insider. Doing what we do every Monday, 7 p.m. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor over at A-Glass. 2 locations right there in the PD, 1 in Florence, 1 in Sumter. Take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement, repair. You can get yourself a free quote, myaglass.com. A-Glass for when you need a glass. Well, man, we are getting really close. 2 weeks from today, we will be talking about what happened in the season opener, man, and it's a big season opener. Top 10 matchup. Clemson 4th in the AP poll, LSU 9th. That's kind of generally the poll I like to use anyway before the playoff poll starts coming out. So if you ever hear me use rankings, they tend to be AP poll rankings more so than coaches poll rankings. And for everybody that's tuned in, you got a question or want to drop a comment, make sure you're doing, if you're on Facebook, make sure you're doing it on the feed from the Clemson Insider page. Otherwise, we will not see it if you just drop it in a group or drop it on my personal page or something like that. But yeah, 2 weeks away, man. We are getting close, and I'll be honest, I think Clemson's probably in a pretty good spot. For the past few years, it just seems like the closer you get to the season, the more we've seen some, the type of injuries that keep guys out for a few weeks minimum. We haven't seen a whole lot of that. I mean, don't get me wrong. There have been guys that have gotten banged up and have missed some time. But outside of Jarvis Green, there's really nobody, at least that I know of to this point, that's looking at missing a lot of time. Khalil Barnes has been out for a couple of weeks dealing with a hamstring injury. We'll see where he is this time next week when they really start amping up, or later this week, really, when they really start amping up prep for LSU. Tomorrow's the last day of practice for fall camp, so we'll see where he is. But, kind of avoided or got lucky with Adam Randall's injury, ended up just being something minor. And same thing with Walker Parks. Doesn't seem to be anything that's going to keep him out for an extended period of time. We'll see if he's back in time for LSU. Fortunately, you got some depth there. Some guys behind him like, Sadler and Sewell. With Sadler's probably going to start at the other guard spot, but Sewell and Thurman. Heck, Parks got hurt. He was working out at center. So they've been working those guys at a bunch of different spots. Second scrimmage the other day, it was Thursday, if my memory serves me correctly. Today start running together sometimes, but I think it was Thursday. It was their second scrimmage. You don't have as many eyes on that second one. There's not a lot of people in there. Like with the first one, you have some donors and stuff in there and family members of some of the players on the rosters. It's easy to it's much easier to get some intel for the first scrimmage than it is the second. But based on the little bit I've heard, it was kind of similar to the first. A lot of good on both sides. You wanted to be competitive, and I've told both of them. I am told that both of them were. Take it anywhere you want to go. 2 weeks until we get really amped up into this thing, man. It will be here before you know it, man. The time is really, really starting to pass by right now. To me, it feels like camp just started, man, and it's already over, and the season is really upon us now. Gotta ask. William says he's got to ask, what was Ian thinking? Fish, orange, wide-eyed. Yeah, I can't answer that. It's an unfortunate situation. I saw several comments yesterday about how they hope this doesn't turn out to be some big distraction. And we're talking about a guy that just joined the team, is way down the depth chart. So I really don't think that it'll be that kind of distraction. But definitely disappointing. I cannot speak to what was in his mind or what he was thinking, other than to say that he had a terrible lapse in judgment. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday that played football at the D1 level, and he was telling me, we were talking about how difficult it is to be under that kind of spotlight in your early 20s, and how I go back to thinking some of the mistakes I made when I was 20, 21, 22, and nobody knows about them. You imagine playing being under that kind of spotlight where you make a mistake and everybody knows about it. And man, he has been getting dragged on Twitter, Facebook, social media, whatever. And we're talking about a guy who over the past 2 or 3 years has kind of grown into that Mr. Clemson kind of role when it comes to the basketball program. There's no way that, I don't care what happens from here on out. There's no way that this, doesn't tarnish his legacy a little bit. I hate to say it, but that's just kind of the truth of the matter. As for what he was thinking, though, man, I have no idea. I know when I was 20, 21, 22, I used to think bad things won't happen to me, man. Those kind of things happen to everybody else, not me. I'm kind of immune to that. And the older you get, the more you kind of realize that's not logical. That's not a logical thought process. I'm saying that's what he was thinking, but, I've been there. With all the D interviews this summer, I'm getting excited to see this new commitment to tackling, measuring it in the Hannafin Hurricane scale. Yeah, I had not actually. We got Hannafin today, Ronan Hannafin today, and I'll be honest, I'm not. The way they do those things sometimes, the guys that are outside will be doing interviews the same time as the guys inside, and usually the more senior guys are the ones that go inside, and the younger guys they'll put outside. So today inside we had Tyler Venables and Colin Griffin, and outside we had Ronan Hannafin, Ricardo Jones, and Hannafin and Jones. They were both doing their interviews at the same time as Venables and Griffin were. So I was inside and didn't get to hear it, and I've not actually gone and listened to those guys yet. I'll do that later tonight. I was actually a little disappointed that I didn't get to go listen and talk to Hannafin, but I actually asked both Venables and Griffin today because I've seen a lot of comments on social media about why this defense is going to be different. It's the same dudes. What makes anybody think they'll be any different from last year? So I actually asked those guys that, same faces, what makes this defense different? I thought Venables had a pretty interesting answer. He talked for about a minute or so. And he talked about his word, not mine. He talked about scars that the defense got last year, was getting kind of chewed up in a lot of games. It was more about personal accountability more so than, he mentioned scheme and that kind of stuff, but man, he really dove into scars that last season left on some of those guys and how they know they're better than that. And they want to kind of prove that last year was more of an anomaly than anything. We'll see. I'm hearing all the right things. I've heard a lot of good things about the way that the defense has kind of attacked the offseason, the way they've performed in camp. But yeah, it's got to translate to the field. You go out there and give up, 45 points to LSU at home, then, and maybe that's what happens. Maybe this transformation takes a little bit longer to take effect. We'll see. But I do think Clemson's defense is going to be much improved, whether it's instantaneous in game one or it's kind of a week-to-week kind of growth. We'll see. But, just, I don't know, based off some of the things or some of the things I have been told by some people up here, I got a lot of confidence in that group right now. It might turn out to be just way off the mark. We'll see how it goes. What are my thoughts on the Clemson strength of schedule head-to-head against South Carolina's? Had a buddy of mine telling me theirs was much more difficult, and I think the schedules are pretty comparable. Let's see. Let me pull up South Carolina's schedule right fast just so I don't make sure I don't overlook anything while I am looking at it. We know they open up with Virginia Tech, and I think South Carolina is going to drag Virginia Tech. I don't think Virginia Tech's going to be very good this year. They come back home and host South Carolina State. That's a gimme. And they host Vanderbilt. That should be a gimme. And they go on the road to Missouri, back home against Kentucky. That before they get a bye, they should be no worse than 4-1 by the time that first bye rolls around, the first weekend in October. I could easily see them being 5-0. After that's when it starts to get a little bit tougher. They go to LSU, they get Oklahoma at home, and then they host Alabama, and then they go to Ole Miss before they finish up in College Station. And that's a little bit of a brutal stretch there. When you compare it to Clemson's, Clemson's got a little bit of – I don't know that they've got the same kind of 4 or 5 game stretch that South Carolina does, but they got one there, in the middle of October that runs into December where they host SMU. Then they're off. Then they get Duke at home, Florida State at home, then go on the road to Louisville, then Furman, and then out South Carolina. I don't think one's all that more difficult over the other. They're just based off my preseason expectations, they're kind of comparable. Clemson is fortunate in the regard to where all of their tough games in that stretch come at home, except for the one against Louisville, or the ACC games anyways, except for that one against Louisville. before they go to Columbia to finish off the season. But yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty comparable. I don't think one just heavily outweighs the other one. If I had to term one of them tougher, I'd probably say South Carolina's, just because they have to go to LSU and go to Ole Miss and go to College Station. But I mean, I don't think there's some huge disparity. What about the growth of Christopher Vizzina? I've heard some good things, which could bode well for the future. Yeah, I mean, all the right things are being said publicly, behind the scenes. You know, I've asked about Vizzina several times, from the end of spring through last week. And the reviews are glowing. They talk about a guy who has experienced a lot of growth in the last year, who looks much more comfortable when he's out there, when he has his opportunities. Even Dabo talked him up some after the second scrimmage the other day. But, you know, that's just a question we're not going to have the answer to until we see it. We just haven't seen enough of him to really know. And I don't know that we will this year, barring an injury to Klubnik. I just don't expect to see him unless there's garbage time in the second half of a game. If Clemson's got a big lead, and they're not going to take the leash off of him and let him run the offense wide open, because Dabo's just never been a guy that runs up the score that way. Well, not usually anyways. I mean, there's been a example here or there, but not in general. That might not be a question we have the answer to until next season. And I sure don't envy him. If he is indeed the starter next year, I do not envy him having to make his first career start at LSU. But, you know, all the right things have been said, man. The kid's big. He's got a big arm. He's if you were to look at him, you would probably think he's not the fleetest of foot. I know I like to say that a lot, but he's much quicker than he looks for a guy his size, and he's kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? He's a better runner than a lot of people probably would give him credit for, because they haven't seen it, and just because he's a big 6'4" kid, 15, 20 pounds, whatever it is. I mean, he's a big old boy. But he moves pretty well for a guy his size. Got a big arm, and you know, when he puts it where he wants to, he's been pretty productive from my understanding. Think there's now 4 or 5 national guys predicting Clemson to the national title game. Klatt might have been the latest. I hope they can meet or exceed expectations. Yeah, man, it just seems like the hype train has just left the station and went off the rails over the past, 2, 3, 4 weeks. We'll see. You know, when you go back and watch this offense last year, you know, there were times when they were great, but then there were times when they were not good. You know, they would just go in these long droughts, and you'd have 3, 4, 5 possessions in a row where they were basically going 3 and out and not moving the ball. That's a hurdle they're going to have to get over if they have any aspirations of making any kind of playoff run, much less a run to the national title game. It kind of starts with that offense at being more consistent. You know, and to me, that starts with Klubnik. You know, again, there was a lot of really good things last year we saw from him, and I thought he got better for the most part as the season wore on. But, man, they would just bog down and seemed like they couldn't get out of their own way in some of those games. You know, think the South Carolina game in the second half, that Louisville game. I mean, there were there were several examples of that last year, even in some games they won. Look at the SMU game, the ACC championship, where they get the big lead, and then all of a sudden they don't really do anything for a half. They've got to be more consistent. He's got to be more consistent. And then obviously you got to take that jump on the defensive side of the ball. You cannot let teams run it down your throat. That defense, Clemson, that run defense last year, it was like some of the number, the yards per carry, you have to go back to the 70s to find a run defense at Clemson that was that bad from a yards per carry standpoint. I mean, how uncharacteristic is it to see a Clemson run defense finish outside of the top 70, 80 in the country? Just very uncharacteristic. And only a year after that defense led the ACC and was top 10 nationally in a bunch of different statistical categories. It's just like instantaneous, fell off a cliff. To me, those are the easy ones. I'm sure those are the two biggest things for everybody else too. The offense has got to be more consistent. And I feel like they will be. Don't get me wrong. It's just, is it going to be at the level that it needs to be in order to win a national title? I'm going to have to see some of that first before I start, thinking about national titles and stuff. Then I want to see what the defense is going to do. I want to see guys be where they're supposed to be. I want to see the edge getting set, both sides. I want to see the linebacker shooting the right gaps, all those things, just stuff they didn't do very well last year. That's another thing Venables or somebody touched on today. I can't remember which one it was, or at least I know some of the defensive players have, about more of a making the fundamentals more of a point of emphasis. But I have no doubt. I mean, make no mistake, that when you look what Clemson's got on this roster right now, and all the production they bring back from both, or all the experience they bring back from both sides of the ball, that's if that team doesn't make the playoff, man, it's a failure of a season. I don't know. I'm not convinced yet that it's a team that's going to make that kind of run. I'm going to have to see a little bit in the regular season, to be honest. Seeing a lot of hype about Cade. I know he's good, but I'm not seeing Heisman candidate this season. Thoughts? Well, first and foremost, I think as a quarterback, it'll be hard to win a Heisman at Clemson because, if you go back to the year that Lamar Jackson won his, and I am of the opinion, that once you really start digging into the numbers, Deshaun probably should have won it that year. Because that's not to knock Lamar Jackson and what he did in 2016. He was phenomenal. But a lot of those numbers came in garbage time when Dabo Swinney would have had his quarterback off the field. And if this team is as good as some are predicting it to be, you're going to have some of that this year, to where Cade's going to be sitting, the last quarter and a half on the bench while other guys are running their numbers up. So that makes it hard right off the top. I also think a lot of the Heisman hype centers around the fact that he's one of the most productive returning quarterbacks. I do think Cade was better last year than some people were giving him credit for at the time. Does that mean he's fully developed and still doesn't have room to grow? Absolutely not. There's definitely some areas in which he can still improve, and I think he'd probably be the first one to tell you that. But if he can find a way to make the offense be a little bit more consistent and avoid those, long droughts and lulls that I was talking about a minute ago. I mean, he can definitely be a contender. A lot of that's going to depend on what the guys do around him, obviously, but whether he wins it or not, I wouldn't bet on it at this point, just because, again, first and foremost, I don't know that Dabo will ever leave in a quarterback on a team that's good enough to have a Heisman quarterback. I don't know if he'll ever leave him in long enough to kind of get the numbers that some of these other guys will get. But we'll see. Certainly wouldn't bet on it at this point, but I'll also add this, we've seen marketed improvement, in each year from Cade. He was very up and down his first year as the starter, took a huge leap before last year, and kind of kept growing as the season went along. I would expect him to take another. I don't think he's got as big of a jump as he can take, but I do think there is another jump to be made, and I think he will make one. Seen some fans say it's a reflection on Brownell. No idea what the heck they're. We talking about Shefflin? Yeah. Yeah, I don't even have no response to that if people are saying that's a reflection of Brad Brownell. That would be people who have not been around him very much. I don't know. To me, that's just a reflection of a young guy making a terrible decision, man. Terrible decision. Why is other service audio better? A lot of times you can't hear players because some people are in there just recording with their phones. When I do mine, I have a little stand. I use my phone, but I have a little stand that it goes on and there's a mic plugged into it. And I've noticed lately, I think my mic's starting to crap out. That mic's been good to me for a long time. It's probably time to replace it. But if you look at it on, if somebody's filming it with like real video equipment, like school does, they've got the mic like this right in front of their face, and the mic's plugged into those devices. That's why. While others are just using their phones. We do both. Just depends on who's there that day. Like today, I was the only one there, so I used my phone. I hadn't even listened to them, but I have noticed my mic starting to crap out a little bit. Am I expecting Cade to start fast against LSU? Last year he had Maffa wide open on the first play against Georgia and threw it at his feet. I think that he will be locked in from play one this year. I think last year, that Georgia game, I think Cade kind of, or at least in the past, has probably suffered from being a little too amped up. That's something he talked about in the past, that he had to learn to manage his emotions better and not be so jacked up at the start of games. And I think he's gotten a lot better at that since then. So I think that plays a part in some of that. He strikes me as a guy that's just kind of grown up. He's not that same pimply faced kid he was 3 years ago. He's grown up. He's physically mature. He's more mentally mature. Whether they come out fast, a lot of that's going to be, based on the game plan. To me, if you could come out fast and go up early, that get that crowd, locked in from the jump. That might be the best path, but certainly wouldn't shock me to see them come out and be a little conservative at first, kind of feel each other out. I mean, we'll see which way they choose to go. How many tickets are sold to LSU? My guess is they are going to have a large contingent in town, probably pretty rowdy also. Yeah, I can't tell you how many LSU people have bought tickets because you'd have to know the numbers from the secondary markets and stuff. But if you look, I'll give you an example. Go look at the College World Series each year. There's this, if you're a baseball fan, you probably already know this, or a college baseball fan, but there's this, establishment there in Omaha where they track how many shots each fan base buys. And LSU wins it every year, and it's not even close. That gives you kind of an idea of how their fan base travels. Me and it was Vandervoort and myself. One day last week, we were having this discussion about how many LSU fans we thought were going to be in town. And it sounds like there's going to be a lot, even a lot that are just coming to tailgate that might not even get into the stadium. They're going to make the trip, whether they get in or not, like tens of thousands. So if you're coming to the game that day, leave early. Shefflin will be fine after all is said and done. He will have this behind him and ready for the season. Well, he's going to – I would not expect to see him when the season starts because he's going to serve a suspension of some kind. I'll be surprised if it's not 3 games at minimum. I'll be surprised, but yeah, he'll be fine. Assuming he learned from his mistake, but I do believe that his legacy is going to have an asterisk or, be tarnished to a degree. Fair or unfair, that's just the world we live in these days. Again, he's kind of, he kind of morphed into that Mr. Clemson guy. He turned down professional basketball deals overseas because he loves Clemson so much he wanted to stay another year. And to do that, and while he was doing that, he was going to go through all these football practices and, fall camp, and hasn't played football since the end of the 9th grade, I think. That's like 7-8 years, something like that. So that gives you an idea of what he feels about the school, but it's going to tarnish his legacy a little bit. I don't think there's any way around that. Sounds like Jahiem Lawson is making some noise from Dabo's comment the other day. He is kind of the epitome of, what the football program is about, since Dabo took over. Dabo always talks about how it's a developmental program. And people just ragged on Dabo for taking Lawson, back in whatever recruiting class it was, because he was one of those 5-heart guys from Daniel, and nobody from Daniel ever is worthy of being on. We got those people who say nobody from Daniel is ever worthy of being on the Clemson football team. But he's kind of the epitome of what Dabo's talking about when he starts talking about this is a developmental program. a guy that was, 215, 220. When he got to campus, he's up to 260, 261 or whatever it is now. I mean, it's obvious he has been putting into work. And when he played last year, there were flashes. You could tell he's got some tools to work with. Just needed to be honed in and fine-tuned, and that comes with more reps. And Clemson's going to need him this year. They need him to take that next step, because I don't think you're going to be able to get by with just Parker and help. You're going to have to go deeper than that. You're going to need some depth there. And I think that's one of the questions heading into the season, is the depth behind Parker and help. But we'll see. He needs, Dabo talked about him being a 1 the other day, which, talking about how he views him as a starter type of guy. But he's got to be better against the run and getting to edge. Said that's some of the stuff he struggled with last year. But, man, Dabo said on a couple of different occasions, he's been talking about Jahiem this year, that he's there now. So we'll see, because they're going to need him. I kind of think, the other backup there, Denoff, is kind of is who he is at this point. But I've always thought there was another step Lawson could take, and they need him to take it this year. And if what Dabo says is true, and sometimes during spring or fall camp, there'll be some guys that he really pumps up and they don't live up to the hype that he created. But I also think they're 99% of the time, anything Dabo says, he says it for a reason. And 98% of the time, it is not aimed at anybody inside the fan base. It's aimed at the guys inside that locker room. But they're going to need him, so they need him to be a 1. That's for sure. Think the Sooners could be the surprise team in the SEC. BV needs them to be, that's for sure. They're not going to be satisfied with going 8-5, 9-4. They want to be competing for SEC titles. We'll see if they can get that offense on track. Harris Sewell's height and weight. He's listed at 6'4", 310 on the Clemson website, but that is not updated with the most recent weigh-in numbers. What have you been hearing about special teams and how this is improving punting, returns, etc.? Looking forward to a solid season. I thought it was interesting after the first scrimmage that Dabo kind of called Nolan Hoosier out. It was almost like he was kind of sending a message to him. He was talking about how last year's kicks don't carry over, yada, yada, yada. He apparently had a terrible kick in the first scrimmage that got blocked, and it was all on him. Then after the second scrimmage, I guess somebody asked – I wasn't there that day. I guess somebody had asked Dabo about Hoosier again, and, he said, yeah, he's had a good week. Make sure you print that. But I think you're going to be fine there. Obviously, I think the biggest questions are with the punting. If you kind of listen to what Dabo said the other day after the second scrimmage, he's talking about how we got guys that can kick at 60 and we got guys that can shank at 20. We can do all that. You know, I'll tell you what I saw in the practices that we were allowed to go into where they actually worked on punting. It was twice. And this is a very small sample size. It was only 2 periods, 1 period each of those days. I thought Robert Gunn was the most consistent those 2 days. Not that he was booming on 50 and 55 yards. They were probably closer to 42, 43, 44. But, man, they had a lot of hang time. Will McCune actually had the best punt we saw. He hit about 55 yards. But he was also the most inconsistent. Jack Smith, he hit a lot of good ones, but he had some that he didn't hit so good too. Just from what we saw, I thought the ball was coming off Gunn's foot better than anybody's. But that was 2 weeks ago. There's been a lot of competition since then. It kind of starting to sound like Smith's probably got the advantage. Dabo also made sure to say that the competition could stretch out into the season. Number one, I think if the punter's the biggest question on your team, you're probably in pretty good shape. But at the same time, you know, it can't be terrible. It doesn't have to be elite, man, but it can't be terrible. You got to have somebody that's not going to, you know, continuously kick it off the side of his foot and, you know, shank them, those kind of things. Reading between the lines the other day, even despite Dabo's remark about we can hit them 60, we can shank them 20, we can do all that. I got the impression that he was not unhappy with the punting. Just by the tone of voice, just by the way he was talking and things, it didn't sound like he was displeased. So that gives me a little encouragement. But that's kind of another one of those things, you know, we're not going to know until we see it, because it's one thing to go out there and do it in practice when nobody's watching. But it's another thing to go out and do it when 80,000 people are on top of you, all screaming at the top of their lungs. Just go back to when Robert Gunn was kicking field goals and went out there and just couldn't do it once the lights came on. He can kick off, no problem, man, but for whatever reason, he just couldn't kick them field goals. So we shall see what ends up happening there. But I did feel a little bit, and I'm kind of sounds like I might be in the minority on that, but I did feel a little encouraged about the way Dabo kind of talked about it the other day, Thursday, after the second scrimmage. Thank God Aaron Nolan didn't come to Clemson. Cutter beating him out unless he red shirts. Yeah, I don't know anything about the quarterback competition over there, but Aaron Nolan was never an instant impact guy, and you know he's only been. I thought he was a guy that was going to need a couple years, and apparently that's the case. Let's see where he is. You know, a year from now, 2 years from now, that'll be what ultimately decides, you know, whether he's any good or not. Not where he is, not in my opinion, anyways. Not where he is as a freshman or a redshirt freshman, because I know people don't like to hear it, man. But every guy develops differently. Some develop at their own pace, and some are a lot more raw coming into college than others, and I think Nolan was one of those guys that was going to need a couple years. Every week seems like there's another recruiting note for Clemson by a player at Rabun Gap. I started to notice the school with Gunner Stockton, but seems like it keeps growing. Yeah, there's going to be at least 4 players from Rabun Gap at the LSU game. Grayson Clary, who is a quarterback. He was the quarterback at Daniel last year. transferred to Rabun Gap and reclassified to 28 because he was very young for the grade he was in. So they just felt like it'd be better for him if he reclassified. He didn't want to be, just turning 17 when he got to college. Probably be beneficial to him from a developmental standpoint too. 2028 linebacker Jay Shell is coming. His daddy was a quarterback on the roster during the Bowden years, so he's a legacy guy. And then you got those two offensive linemen, the big-time guy, Elijah Hutchinson and Jacob Burns. Both those guys are coming. They're all coming together. They got a game somewhere Friday night where it makes it easy so they can hit Clemson. And that there might end up being more. That's just the four I know of at this point. They've all confirmed with me that they're coming. And, going back to camp, there was one day of camp. I think it was that Friday. Don't hold me to that. Couldn't have been Wednesday because I wasn't there. I think it was that Friday. Man, they brought like 30 guys in from Rabun Gap. And they were easy to identify because they all had on the Rabun Gap shirts with their numbers on the front and stuff. I wish everybody did that. But, yeah, there were a bunch of guys there from that school during camp. Could not be more excited to see the defense in a couple of weeks. I am on the TA hype train. I think a lot of people are on the Tom Allen hype train, but and make no mistake, man. I think I think after what happened last year, not just on the field, man, but some of the stuff that I've heard that was just kind of bubbling up behind the scenes too. You had to make a change, and you had to go with somebody with a pedigree, somebody that's been there, done that, somebody that everybody in that room's going to respect, players, coaches alike. Not only does Dabo go out and get somebody with that kind of track record, he goes out and gets somebody that's been a head coach at the Power 5 level, not just for a couple of years, but for 7 years. So the guy's kind of done a little bit of everything as a coach when it comes to his experience. But you listen to some of these guys talk about him, and it's a lot. You hear them regurgitate a lot of the same stuff. That's when you start hearing the guys talk about the same thing over and over and over and over. To me, that's how you can tell, what's real. We've heard so many talk about, the accountability he's brought, the how he holds them all accountable for loafs and stuff. They count him up on tape, and he's, the energy he brings. You combine all that stuff, but to me, I think the biggest thing is creating a scheme that is not overly complex. We actually had one of the players today said they dumbed it down. It was dumbed down. That was the way he said it, dumbed down. You don't give them so much to think about out there, and it allows them to play more freely. You don't have to think too much. You just react instead of thinking. I think that's going to be one of the biggest difference makers this year is the fact that it's not so complex and you don't have players thinking about what they're supposed to do. They're just reacting because they've repped it so many times. And when you got something, that gets a lot more complex, you can't always rep it over and over in practice because there's too much to rep in that amount of time. So when you simplify it and, you get it, it's kind of like muscle memory. I think that, and the emphasis that's being placed on some of the finer details like tackling. This was not a very good tackling group this year. I don't expect that to be the case this year. David Pollock's picking Clemson. I think he's got a pretty good grasp of the game. Of the national analysts out there, Pollock is one of the ones I think more highly of. Absolutely. That's just me. Do you think we will play 3 linebackers on the field at the same time, and will we be better covering backs coming out of the backfield? Seems we have struggled with this in recent years. I think you're going to see a 4-2-5 more so than anything else. 4 linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 DBs. It doesn't mean you can't have one of those smaller, faster linebackers out in that, what Clemson used to call the Sam spot. They're going to call it the Tiger now. But it kind of sounds like Shelton Lewis will probably get a lot of play there. But a lot of that's going to depend on who you matched up against and the type of offense you're facing. Like Clemson ran a lot of 4-2-5 last year. Then you see them go up to Blacksburg, and with the kind of offense Virginia Tech runs, they trotted the 4-3 out there. That's I think that, as far as best I can remember, that was the first time they had done that all year. Then they played a lot of 4-3 against South Carolina that night in the first half. And then for whatever reason went back to the more traditional, more of a nickel look in the second half with Sammy Brown on the sidelines. But, I think you're going to see a lot of 4-2-5 under Tom Allen. That's kind of his signature. I think Sammy and Wade will be your 2 main linebackers, but I think we're going to see a lot of Jeremiah too. Alexander's just, I think, again, it'll go back to matchups, and they've talked about using him in different ways. So I think they'll find ways to get him on the field too. So many want to pin the offensive struggles on an injured Maffa, but we saw inconsistent play before we got hurt. I do think there were lulls like that all season long. I do think once teams kind of figured out Clemson couldn't run the ball, they were able to change the way they defended the offense, which made it a little bit harder because nobody thought Clemson was going to be able to run the ball because they couldn't. But no, you're the valid point there. It was not all about Maffa being hurt. Will Allen call more zone coverages and secondary eyes back on the QB as compared to Goodwin's preference? I don't know. I do know that, his scheme's supposed to be very defensive back friendly. I don't expect to see way more zone coverage than what we saw with Goodwin. I mean, we might see a little bit more, but I think probably see more of, especially if those corners are as good as I think they can be. You probably see a lot just more man type stuff. That would be what I think, anyways. That's what's going to happen. But I really like those 2 corners in Terrell and Hampton. At this point, I just don't know that Lucas is going to be able to stay healthy. I think Corey and Gibson is a guy that could end up seeing a lot of time this year. I think he's going to end up being another really good corner for Clemson. Man, if they talked to Brandon Strozier, during camp, the lights kind of come on for him, man. If you can get 4 that you can really rely on and that you have a lot of trust in, I think it allows you to do more things and you're able to play more man. But we'll see how they approach it. Do I have any concerns about the secondary? I actually like the pieces Clemson has on the back end. And I know not everybody feels that way. I thought Avian Terrell was really good as a freshman. I thought he kind of had a sophomore slump, or at least at times last year. I thought Ashton Hampton just, he was a freshman last year. There was some good, there was some not so good. Most players tend to take the biggest jumps between the first and their second year. Fully expect him to do that. The biggest thing on the back end is going to be replacing R.J. Mickens because he was such a heck of a player, man. He was so good on the back end, particularly last year. Just got better with each passing year. And now, Khalil Barnes has been kind of because he was kind of going to slide, according to what Mickey Conn said anyways, he was going to slide over and take R.J. Mickens' spot, but he's kind of been hampered by a hamstring. But, man, I've heard a lot of good things about Ronan Hannafin. I am a big believer in Ricardo Jones. Colin Griffin's played a lot of football for you. He's another guy. He's a redshirt junior now. So, I think you got some pieces to work with back there. And I think you got probably a little bit more depth than people are giving them credit for. Just because the guys don't have a lot of experience doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to be any good. There might be some learning curves for some of those younger guys, and but that's kind of the nature of the sport. You gotta get your feet wet at some point. But I really believe Terrell's gonna have a big bounce back season if we're comparing him to his sophomore season. I think he's just so much better than what he showed at times. I think there was a lot of those guys on that defense are so much better than what they showed last year. I think, the deeper we got into the season, the more frustrated players got, and the more frustration leads to, worse play. And I think that was part of the problem last year. But yeah, I kind of like what Clemson's got on the back end. But to me, the biggest thing is the defensive front has got to control the line of scrimmage and make the quarterback uncomfortable. That is the best recipe for a really good pass defense. That's the best thing for your secondary, because no secondary is going to hold up for 5, 6, 7 seconds, play after play after play after play. The guys up front have to get home and make the quarterback uncomfortable. Let's not forget 2 wide receivers who got stronger and learned the system. Add a healthy Brown. Maybe Cade finds open receivers more often and deliver in rhythm. Yeah, there should be no shortage of weapons on that offense. I think you can go 5, 6 deep at receiver. You know what you got in Antonio. You get Tyler Brown back fully healthy. That gives you 2 legit dangerous slot guys. And while TJ Moore came in a little more physically developed than Westco did. He's just a little bit bigger of a guy. As you say, they're both bigger, strong. Westco just looks different, man. He doesn't look like this guy that's packed on, 15, 20 pounds. Don't get me wrong, but he just looks like a guy whose body is kind of started to mature and develop. He just looks stronger. He looks like he probably weighs $190 now as opposed to $180, 85 last year. I think Dabo said he weighed 190, 191-ish, something like that. But he just looks stronger. And there was some times last year I thought that hampered him with some of the more physical defensive backs. So that's only going to help him this year. But, yeah, there should be no shortage of weapons for Klubnik, man. And we're hadn't even mentioned Olsen Pat Henry or Christian Betancourt or maybe an Adam Randall out of the backfield, or that will not be a reason that this offense isn't successful. It's not. If the offense is not successful, it's not going to be because they don't have any weapons. Because they've got them. Yeah, Venable said today he needs a job. Does he go with Brent or stay at Clemson? I thought it was pretty telling that he stayed at Clemson when Brent left for Oklahoma. But, a lot of that might depend on where he can get a spot at. You got to start somewhere. But it would not shock me at all, assuming, Dabo stays the coach into the foreseeable future. It would not shock me at all to see Venables on the staff at some point. Could the defense jump into the top 10, 15? I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm super bought in. Everywhere Allen's been, year one is a huge jump. Other than Penn State, he's never had this amount of talent. No, last year was really the first time he's had comparable talent. And, all his defenses do tend to produce year number one. If you go back to the year before last, this defense with some of the same guys was in the top 10 in some national categories. They were, one of the best defenses in the ACC. I mean, so it wouldn't shock me at all to see them somewhere in the top 15 again this year in some of these categories. I have liked what I've heard. I'll tell you that. Saw a good tweet about how Cade's numbers were almost identical to Baker Mayfield. Yeah, I saw that tweet too. And he won the Heisman, wished the same for Cade, but Dabo will make it difficult. Yeah. I don't disagree. Cam looks good in the minors. Yeah, he's got off to a pretty good start. He had a couple doubles in his first game. He had that over-the-shoulder catch in his second game. Yeah, I doubt he stays there very long. I would expect he'll start moving up rather quickly. I like the team, but I see 3 losses, LSU, Louisville, and South Carolina. South Carolina is scary good. Why is South Carolina scary good? I don't get it. They lost 30-something players from that team last year. They lost a ton of talent off of that defense. They got questions up front. They got, outside of a couple of wide receivers, they're very young. Yeah, I mean, they don't know whether. Last I heard, they don't even know if their running back's going to be eligible. I don't get. I think South Carolina's a little overrated, to be quite honest. But I mean, let's say all that, and a win in Columbia is going to be scary hard. Clemson's kind of owned that rivalry in Columbia. I mean, I don't see why it would be scary hard, but let's say they go 9-3. So they could easily go 9-3 and still win the ACC and get into the playoff. Because those are just 2 conference losses right there. Need Mayo to emerge at defense. Going back, if you go back and listen to Chris Rumpf talk about Darian Mayo, like right before the start of fall camp when they had the big media thing where all the assistants talk, I got the impression that Mayo might still be a year away, just based on some of the things Rumpf said and how he said some of them. But then, if you talk to somebody else, they might have heard it differently. Like Vandervoort, he heard something entirely different than what I did. But yeah, I mean, if Mayo's ready to contribute this year, and I mean, ready to really contribute, even if it's only as a third down pass rusher when needed, I mean, that would be big. Absolutely. 100%, man. Will Coach Allen be on the field or in the box? Dabo made it sound like he's going to be in the box, but I don't know that that's 100% decided. He's going to be wherever he wants to be. I'll put it that way. If he's in the box, it's because he wants to be. A man says his dynasty team, Tyler Brown, won the Heisman. How much weight has TJ Moore put on this offseason? Saw a photo and he looked much bigger. Excited for Wesco and Moore to crush it. Hopefully they can avoid the receiver sophomore injury curse. Hey, well, he got Wesco last year. Remember, he didn't play every game, but Moore was at 205 last year, and he looks. They didn't release the weigh-in numbers this year, so I can't tell you exactly what he weighs now, but he looks like he's about the same weight, but in better shape, if that makes sense. He looks a little more cut. I don't even know if that's the word I'm looking for. His body looks a little more defined. So it looks like he's added some strength, but I don't know that he's much heavier than he was last year. I don't know that you want him to be. But yet, both those guys, man, they look good. If we have stalls on offense like last season, punter will become something folks will talk about. I hope Dabo's decision works out. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is at this point. You got who you got. I really was leaning towards thinking Dabo was going to get a punter out of the portal, but it turns out he decided he didn't need one, and more often than not, he's been right about those things. So we'll see how it plays out. Still feel like Denson will push and overtake CV for the starting QB in 2026. Based on what? I mean, what have you seen to make you think Denson's going to push and overtake CV for the starting QB in 26? I mean, he's got a lot of – there's a lot of stuff to like about Denson, man, but he's still very raw. And he's not going to get a ton of work the rest of the year because that pretty much goes to the first and second string guys. Nothing's impossible, but I don't know that I'd bet money on that. Thinking that Alexander is going to be that tiger, kind of like Isaiah Simmons. Yeah, somebody asked Dabo about that a couple of weeks ago, and his response was, "Would you want Alexander covering a guy like Antonio?" So, I mean, maybe against certain teams, certain matchups, but I would not expect to see Alexander out in the nickel a ton lined up against having to cover slot guys. Hearing TAs in the box and Bowl where his on-field coach jumping up. How's he jumping, guys? They're all down there on the field. They're all down there too. I mean, how's he jumping them? He's a position coach just like the rest of them. Why wouldn't he be on the field? All those, except, I think Mickey Kahn was in the box some last year to kind of help Wes. But, other than that, all those guys are on the field pretty much. Who do I anticipate being the starting safeties? Assuming everybody's healthy. Barnes and Jones. That would be my guess, man. But I'm telling you, man, Hannafin's getting a lot of love. He's getting a lot of love. Can't wait to see Clemson dictate the game, not always adjust to what they're given. I would absolutely like to see more aggressiveness for sure. Have I made a win-loss projection yet? No. I'll do that next week, one day before the season starts. Have I heard a reason why they haven't released the weigh-in numbers yet? Or no, they're not going to. Dabo said that he didn't even know they'd been releasing them all these years. Make of that what you will, but what he said was he didn't see a reason to put that out there, and give anybody information they didn't need. That was what he said. I could see losing to Georgia Tech or Duke ahead of losing to South Carolina. Clemson has a huge advantage down in that swamp. Georgia Tech's going to be a tricky one, man. It's the first ACC game. It's the first road game. It comes right after the gimme game. Or I shouldn't say gimme because Troy's proved to be pretty good in recent years, or at least in some years here recently. That's a game you got to have, man. And I think Georgia Tech's going to be better than some people think. I'm a big Haynes King guy. They're going to be dangerous, man. Brent Key's got that program heading in the right direction. They've been making some noise on the recruiting front. There's a lot to like about Georgia Tech. That you do not want to start out the gate 0-1 in ACC play. Can't do it. Chad Morris used to get aggressive with trick plays. A few blew up big time and cost the Tigers. Sometimes I think Dabo tries too hard to avoid mistakes on offense, maybe because of those scars. I think most of that is because they've been so good on defense. He's been able to rely on his defense. There's no reason to, take a bunch of chances. You could when your defense is that good, you can also make the argument from the other side of that. Hey, you can take more chances because your defense has been so good. But, I think that's a lot of the reason why sometimes Clemson's been what people would call conservative or look conservative at times on the offensive side of the ball because, he's become so accustomed to be able to lean on that defense. Don't feel like you got to rush anything. I think that's been a big part of it. Hannafin is a lick layer from what I've heard. Yeah, I've heard he can lay the wood. Hannafin said as kids, his dad had he and his brothers practice tackling and rating them on a hurricane scale. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I got to go listen to that here when we're done here. Maybe there's some matter of fact, my man saying it right here was saying what I was about to say. Maybe there's some NIL opportunities in that somehow. I'm not a marketing guy, but who knows? Big thank you to everybody that's tuned in tonight. I want to thank our sponsor over at A-Glass. 2 locations in the PD, 1 in Florence, 1 in Sumter. Get yourself a free quote today, myaglass.com. We'll be right back here next Monday, 7 p.m., leading right into the season. We'll talk. We'll start, or we will focus more heavily on LSU and the game that night as opposed to just broader things that we've talked about throughout camp. Might even start making some predictions that night, man. We'll see how it goes. But again, I want to thank everybody who tuned in here tonight. Don't forget to hit that like button. If you have not subscribed to us on YouTube, please do that too. Check us out on the site, ClemsonInsider.com. See y'all next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.